I didn't need to ask you for that. Oh, no, I'll do that. Okay, all right.
Good evening, everyone. We're very happy to have Samantha Abell, who is the city manager, to speak for us tonight. Thank you so much, Samantha, for being here.
Happy to do that.
Well, thank you. I know that you didn't come just for me tonight because I've already seen your great agenda and all the positive things that you are doing to preserve and promote the historic fabric of our Gulf Breeze area. So thank you for that. But if there's any part of you that was interested in what I had to say this evening, I appreciate that as well because I know it's cold and a little wet. And so I want to make sure that I make this time together interesting. And on that, I would hope that I could get a little feedback from you as I talk. That always helps me out. So if I start sharing a story with you and you think, where is she going with this? What we just need to do is just give me one of these. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change tracks because we have so much that we can talk about. We're going to be like that 8-track. And if you just don't like the track I'm on and you'd like to hear something else, that's right, you can just do this. Just let me know. And we'll go right on to the next. And I definitely want to make sure that we save time at the end for just open discussion and any questions that you have, because for me, this is the first time that I've had the opportunity to come and talk with the Historical Society. And so I'm looking forward to that tonight, and I want this to be an opportunity where you get to know me better and I get to know you better. But importantly, after tonight, you feel like I am one of yours, because I truly feel like you are my tribe. And so part of it, I'm going to share with you a little bit about my background, both professionally and personally, so that you can know why it is that I feel that way. And then we're going to dive into our year in review. Has anybody in the room not seen the year in review? So everyone has already seen it? Okay, then we're not going to dive into the year in review. Y'all just gave me one of these. And so instead we're going to talk about projects that carried forward from last year to this, and some of the capital projects that you can expect to see, and then also where I think our council is going to be going with charting the course for the city of Gulf Breeze for the next 10 years. So does that sound good? Okay. All right, good. So appreciate the feedback. So a little bit about myself. Let's say I was born in the Alexandria, Virginia area, and in middle school, my family moved to Atlanta. We were part of that big wave in the late 80s to move to the Atlanta area. I have a sister who's 20 months older than myself. All of our family were still back in Virginia. My sister didn't speak for a year and a half after we moved, left all of our cousins. I absolutely hated growing up where we grew up. We had the best education, the best of experiences, but I did not like the big city. I always felt like I was alone. And so I was really interested when I would watch movies like Fried Green Tomato. I then picked up every Fannie Flagg book that was ever written. When I saw, Steel Magnolias and those kind of things, I way over-romanticized it. And so I went to Georgia State, and I majored in public administration with a focus in planning and economic development. And I thought that I would spend my career overseas working in underdeveloped countries, focusing on infrastructure. I wanted to go where there were few people and help make growth and sustainability happen. I fell in love with my husband. We didn't know how to make it work because he hates the city even more than I do. And so what we did is we joined the Air Force. So we did, together, and made the decision, let's just see this great world. So we put in for the Azores, we put in for Guam, everywhere overseas, and our first duty assignment was Arkansas. And so in all of our pictures when we were married, you see my family crying. They're crying because they literally laughed us out of the state. They thought it was hilarious that we signed our names to the man, my husband, joining, and their world traveler daughter, who wanted to go off and see everywhere, literally went straight down 78 all the way to Little Rock, Arkansas. And not only that, but it was also a non-deployable base. So I actually went more places than my husband. But I share that with you to say that when we arrived, we lived in a downtown area called North Little Rock that was part of a documentary in the late 90s called Gang Banging in Little Rock. I don't know if anybody has ever seen it. Still something that you can find. And it described the Bloods and the Crips who had come from the East Coast and taken over North Little Rock. And so we were excited to see this, and we got there, and actually it it was very empty, and there were vacant historic homes and hardly anyone living in them. Those who were left in this downtown area were our senior citizens. And what I found is there was a nonprofit that actually was started by a woman named Rosemary Hamill, and Rosemary was a retired special needs principal. And the name of the nonprofit was Argenta Community Development Corporation, and she and her neighbors said, we've had enough. We're tired of the gangs. There had been 2 shootings within a year and a half. And so they had worked with the city, and they said, we want to create a nonprofit, and we want to start working with code enforcement to purchase these crack homes one by one and rehabilitate them and then sell them back to first-time home buyers. Well, for someone like me who had been over-romanticizing small-town living, man, that was what I wanted. And so I pulled up all I made big portfolios. I had interned through the governor's office. I had, through Zell Miller, Roy Barnes. I had worked in the deregulation of natural gas, and so I was telling them all the reasons why they needed to diversify and not just focus on residential but commercial, and I went over there, and I just remember the looks on their faces. And when I was done pitching why they needed to hire me, they said, that is really nice, but we don't have money or a job for you. And so I said, I will change your mind. And I went to work for a barbecue joint, and I just showed up every single week until I finally convinced them that I had found a grant that would fund my job. And so my husband and I moved off base. We moved downtown, and we bought a home that was on the National Register of Historic Places. It was called the Thomas J. Morris House. It was built by the pharmacist back in 1911. A very, very large home. You could see the outside from the inside without any windows on that wall. There was a 2-story carriage house in back. Has anybody ever seen the 1980s movie called The Money Pit with Tom Hanks? Yes. You're saying, what a steal this was. Imagine two kids in their early 20s who have never actually come up against any obstacles. And so we started researching how to restore historic homes. And at that same time, Argenta CDC was working with first-time home buyers to get them to move back into this area. And so what they found is they were having the most success with gay people. Gay people had disposable income, they were willing to take a risk, and it was working wonderfully. And so I would tell you, one of the best things for your property values, find some gay people who are willing to take a risk on a neighborhood. Actually, believe that or not, in Little Rock, Arkansas, was very successful because they focused on taking back the community one block at a time. It would not have worked to just purchase one home and the rest around there continued to be housing prostitutes and selling drugs. So what they did is they worked with code enforcement. They continued to fine and they continued to enforce the law, and they purchased homes, we're talking for just hundreds of dollars, an entire square block, and then they would work with young married couples and they would work with gay couples for them to buy that home, and we experienced gentrification. And so imagine that scenario. My husband and I buy this large home that was 2,800 square feet. And there are 2 doors along the front because they had no air conditioning back in 1911, so they would open both doors and the air would circulate, right? And people would sleep on the front porch. And so with these windows that went floor to ceiling all along, the front, obviously you could see everything. We were studying how to restore this home, and with plaster, as you well know, back in the early 1900s, they would use fabric on the walls. And so I went to the store and found a beautiful pattern of cabbage rose with the idea that I will put the cabbage rose on these plaster walls that are very cracked, and then I would paint over it, and it would be a beautiful texture, right? I'm in my early 20s. I found a beautiful cabbage rose. It did not matter that it was a hot pink because I would be painting over it. And so I starched it onto the walls. And it, this just went well into the night. And so you could see everything from outside. The next day, I was working at Argenta CDC, and I got a call from the city because they had received calls throughout the night that there was a whorehouse. And they were literally putting hot pink on all of the walls. And that was how I got to know the city. I had to convince them that I was not a madam who was about to start a brothel in the middle of downtown. So that was how I got to know the city. Shortly after, at the age of 25, I was made vice president of Argenta CDC, and I went to work for the city of North Little Rock as their city planner. and was able to continue to do work for them. And so we continued to work, all told, for North Little Rock for 6 years. We tripled property values in 7 years, and it's nationally acclaimed. The name of that historic area is Argenta, which is Latin for silver. And so if you're young and you're idealistic and that's the beginning of your career, like, watch out for ever after, because there is nothing that you cannot do when you have a group of senior citizens who band together and get a 501c3 and say, we're going to buy these homes back from these gangs, and we're going to work with the city, and we're going to make things happen. And they triple property values in 7 years, and now it is an absolutely wonderful place to live. The trolley comes across Little Rock on the bridge and comes right in front of 401 West 7th, which is where I used to live. No coincidence. And it's a beautiful, revitalized area. So from there, we were stationed in Alaska, where my second child, our daughter, was born. And then we moved to Fort Walton Beach. We were moved to Fort Walton Beach just days after Hurricane Katrina. And there I started off as their senior planner, and then I was promoted to the essentially the community services director position, but it was the planning and economic development director is the position there. When I came to Fort Walton Beach, they were under a moratorium. They could not issue any permits for any more development. And the reason for that is that they were out of compliance with some of their planning as it relates to their public works. And so that was one of the first things that I had to focus on was their infrastructure. After the BP oil spill, within 11 days, I talked my family into, let's go to Mississippi and let's help with the cleanup. My husband's family had retired from Augusta, Georgia to Mississippi. They had been there since days after Katrina. People believe they were in the witness protection program because they had sold everything, showed up with cash, and were part of the, you see why I married my husband. They were part of that cleanup, and I wanted to go and help with the BP oil spill. And so that's what we did. We pulled up everything in Fort Walton Beach, and we moved to Goche, Mississippi. Does anyone know where Goche is? Yes? Awesome. And so when we went to Goche, it was the youngest city in the state of Mississippi. That was very exciting to me. It's 33 square miles, 2 interstate connections between the industrial hub, Pascagoula, and the tourism hub, Biloxi, of the entire state. And I thought, wow, for someone like myself who wants to be on the front of creating a brand new city, that was super exciting. Does anyone know how big the city of Gulf Breeze is compared to Goche, which is 33 square miles? Do you know how big Gulf Breeze is?
4.6 miles.
Oh, you're good. That's exactly right. That's right. 4.6 square miles. Okay, 4.6 because we're a peninsula, right? And so that was very exciting. That was an excellent, just a great experience for myself. When we arrived, the water in Goche was brown. And so that was one of the first things we needed to address. If you want restaurants and people to live there, you've got to address that Southern tea issue that you have. And then also, when you are a young city and you are just starting out, you're like a toddler trying to get your legs underneath you. And so roles and responsibilities, the functions of the administration versus the governing board, all of those things are issues. We didn't have a human resources department. And so in talking with them and looking at their budget, we decided to outsource our public works department. And in doing that, we were able to negotiate in a new water filtration plant. And I was able to use an engineering firm, which I had worked with very closely in the panhandle of Florida, and bring them in to make that happen. So that was one of the things that I was very excited about, is that, in fact, I had only been, and I digress, when we first went over, I was in the same position as Planning and Economic Development Director, but within a year, I took the appointment of City Manager. And so I had been City Manager for maybe a week, and my mom called and said, "Did you clear up the water yet?" And I said, "I'm going to need a little bit more time than a week, Mom." But she was on me. And the whole time we were there, we continued to keep our friends here in Florida, and we promised our kids that when our oldest was ready for high school, that we would move back. And so they had a really good perspective. My daughter, being very young when we had first arrived, she knew that when we would hit the Florida line, we would hit the Publix and Gulf Breeze, and that they had sushi. And so that was what she knew about Gulf Breeze, is they have a Publix. It's the first one from the exit that we would hit after Alabama, and so there was always an affection for Gulf Breeze. But when my daughter graduated 5th grade, my son Keegan graduated 8th grade. And she had just graduated. It was the beginning of summer, and I went in her room, and she had packed up everything that she had in her room into boxes. Now, she just graduated 5th grade, so we're talking cereal boxes. We're talking shoe boxes, some of which did not belong to her. She had pulled them out of other people's closets. There was one box that she had taped closed, and it said only open in emergencies. As her mother declared martial law, I opened it. There was a helmet, Slim Jims, and jelly beans in it. This is the summer. I don't know where the jelly beans came from, and we have never eaten Slim Jims in our family, so I don't know where that came from either. But she said, Mom, you promised when Keegan was ready for high school that we would move back to Florida. And she was serious about that. And so that is when I started taking calls, and I found out I was a final 3 candidate for a county administrator position. And the day I got that call, I also applied for this position here. As blessings would have it, my first day in Gulf Breeze was the kids' first day of school. And so that was huge. My husband, who had retired from the Air Force in Fort Walton, went back to school in the GI Bill, became a registered nurse in the emergency room there in Ocean Springs, and so he now works in the emergency room of Gulf Breeze. So hopefully you never have to see my husband. His name is Levi, but if you ever do, he's got a red, wiry beard, and he waxes his mustache up like this. He looks like you need to ask him for a draft, but he can actually fix a broken arm or leg as well. And so that's the history of us. We're very passionate about public service, about community, but also how that interplays with our historic preservation. And that's certainly some of the conversations that we've had with you and the Benson home. We're excited about that project because our council is also very excited about that project. And as it relates, to our council, I want to share with you a little spoiler alert to a conversation we're going to have this Saturday. Saturday will be the first planning retreat of this new mayor and council. We're going to talk about community development and where we are in our story as Gulf Breeze. So in the communities that I have lived in, the first thing I asked myself is, where are we at in our life cycle? And so obviously as it relates to Fort Walton Beach, we were in a time of turbulence. It was right after Katrina. You had people coming from all over to stay in the affordable housing and to stay on base there. And at the same time, you had people moving to the area. They could not issue any permits for new development until they took care first of some of the internal community issues that they had. So you couldn't have economic development growth before they took care of some of those sustainability issues. Going over to GOCHE, they were at the very infancy stages of their organization development. And so where is Gulf Breeze? So Gulf Breeze began its incorporation, I'm not telling anyone, just know this certainly, in 1958. 1958 is where your story begins. 1959, that was the first time that the effort to incorporate was taken to a referendum, and that effort failed. And what everyone learned from that was that we need to make sure that we aren't starting from a political conversation, but from the people. And you created a town hall group committee, was what I believe the name of that was town hall committee, town hall group committee. And so the next year, after having neighborhood meetings and talking with people about the benefits of providing a higher level of service than what might otherwise be offered out of Milton and North Santa Rosa County, it succeeded. And you became a city of incorporation in 1961. And so for the next 40 years, you are a baby city. And for the next 40 years, you are learning how to communicate with your county commissioners who weren't altogether thrilled that you decided to break off on your own. You decided what types of government you want to have. Your charter originally had no additional ad valorem at all. You still have one of the lowest ad valorem. You're in the top 3 lowest ad valorem in the entire state of Florida. And that comes from those founding principles that you had, which were based on volunteerism. Your city council people only earn $1 a year. They're professionals. You have professionals who incorporated your city, who wanted a higher level of service on a neighborhood level to begin with, and that's still what you have today. The first 40 years, you're working on roles and responsibilities. You're working on harmonizing your community, and so we call that in community development, we call that the unifying period. Okay, that was the first about 40 years. And your budget, to begin with, was 0. everything was on a volunteer basis, and it was on a fundraiser basis. You still have a volunteer fire department to this day. And that's unheard of for several reasons. One of the reasons it's unheard of is because you still enjoy a very low fire rating. And that's because we can rely on our neighbors to help us through mutual aid, and we help them as well. And that's where that volunteerism comes in. Just because you have a volunteer fire department doesn't mean that you have less professionalism. Because incredibly, they're all certified firefighters. They are professional firefighters at other local governments, and they volunteer their time with the city of Gulf Breeze. They're committed to that. That is absolutely incredible, and it saves us well over $1 million a year. So, so your first 40 years is unifying. After that, in 2000, by 2000, your budget was $12.8 million, and you had about your population from 2000 till now has virtually been unchanged. So in that time, your population was about 5,800. Today, it's 5,884, but who's counting, right? That's a census. So if we're off at all, it's not Samantha who's off. But I mean, Bureau of Bureau of Economic and Business Report. But regardless, in the year 2000, that is when you went into a period of what we call sustainability, which means that you saw growth only as it relates to our utilities. That was when we were starting to try to use ECUA water, and that didn't work. And so we went to Fairpoint Regional Utility. We created that with Holly Navarre. And so today, that's how you receive your water from the aquifer, is up in North Santa Rosa County. And we are part of an organization where we all come together and agree to how much that drinking water is going to cost us. Excellent drinking water, but you did that in 2000, so we had to pay to run those pipes. We had to hire people to run those pipes, and that's also when, in doing so, we acquired the South Santa Rosa Utility District. And so by doing that, we're taking on all of those people, that additional revenue. And so from 2000 to 2010, again, you see that as being a time of sustainability, also because of the recession, right? So you're growing your utilities, but otherwise the recession is occurring. From 2010 until now, we have gone into a period of growth. And so we have had a mayor and a council who've been very entrepreneurial minded. And so today you have a separate agency from the city called the Capital Trust Agency. And the Capital Trust Agency is absolutely amazing. It generates for the city over $1 million a year. And for those of you who don't know what the Capital Trust Agency is, there's a state law that allows for those who are doing charter schools and public hospitals, public schools, to receive tax-exempt bonds at a lower interest rate. And so the Capital Trust Agency partners with these developers to be the conduit bond issuer so that they enjoy that lower tax-exempt rate, and there's an administrative fee that results. That's it, nothing too difficult about that. But we have, on our board, we have members of our community. And so that's another way that we have been able to continue to receive revenues, but also keeping our millage very low. So being very growth-minded has resulted in our most livable city master plan. How do we be the most livable city? Well, we do that through sustainability by keeping our millage low, but continuing to look for ways to grow outside the city. What we learned while we were being very growth-minded, though, is that natural disasters continue to happen. And there's those periods of turbulence. And while we're looking for how we can continue to grow revenue while keeping our millage low, we kind of have left our back door open because we've still been vulnerable to those natural disasters as they occur. And so what you've seen in the last, I would say, the last major flood happened in 2014, but certainly in the last 3 years, you've seen a very focused approach on stormwater. And so with this mayor and council, you're now entering a new age where we're talking about resiliency, which is one of the things that brought us together tonight. The difference between resiliency and sustainability is resilient is the measure for how quickly you bounce back when the turbulent things happen. So can anybody give me an example of someone that is resilient?
Panama City.
Panama City. So tell us a little bit about that.
Panama City is here by Michael, most recently. Another town is Bluntstown. Bluntstown is another north of there. Still hurricane winds, 150 mile an hour there, destroyed the hospital. Those are good examples of resilience. Panama City, Mexico City Beach, the resilience of the local communities coming together to help. The volunteerism comes out. So they are resilient.
Yes, absolutely they are. Our police went to Panama City to help. And an interesting thing is that when, after a storm, FEMA does not immediately turn on the tap and start giving you money for mutual aid. People who pay for those officers to show up are those very cities. Panama City is the one who is having to make sure that they're paying for mutual aid if those volunteers don't show up. And so they were willing to do that. And of course, our police department said, we appreciate that very much, save that dollar. Save that for someone else who needs it. But they had that ability because they were resilient. They had saved, they know they're in a coastal hazard area, whereas other communities did not. Another example would be having policies that are specific to an emergency. An example, Pastor Sean York of United Methodist. Does anyone know Pastor Sean York? And so with the Methodist Church, he helps with disaster recovery. And one of the challenges he has had to take on is that there is a Methodist church that was, I believe it was Mexico City, that I was just reading in the paper. The church was a safe harbor, and so you had hundreds of people just pitching tents because they had nowhere else to go. But that was against the city ordinances. And so the city said, look, unfortunately, you've got to go somewhere else because we can't have a tent city. And so what do you do in situations like that where those who have been relocated, they've gone, but you still have those who are displaced, there's no place for them to be employed. And so that's also an example of the lack of resiliency that you can have when you don't have those emergency procedures. So on our city council currently, you have Tom Nail, who's the administrator of St. Anne's. Tom has been a longtime participant of our Interfaith Disaster Recovery Council. Has anyone ever heard of the Gulf Breeze Idr? Has anyone ever heard of that? So the IDR was a result of Hurricane Ivan, and we realized we could not wait on FEMA, and we needed to focus then on our recovery. And so it's all of our churches commit every year. They all come together, and one of our churches will say, we agree that immediately post-disaster, we will house everyone. And another church says immediately after a storm, we will feed everyone. They absolutely all come together every year and renew their commitment. We as a city communicate with them so that we're not in that same situation of trying to figure out, oh my goodness, are we going to have to adopt a new local law to agree to a tent city? We don't have to worry about that because the city already knows where we're going to be housing our residents. And so Tom Nail has been a longtime participant of our Interfaith Disaster Recovery Committee. You have Cherry Fitch, who is our previous principal of Gulf Breeze. You have Todd Torgerson. Todd Torgerson is with Consolidated Insurance. He owns his own company, very insurance-minded. You have Randy Abear, who's the president of his homeowners association in Plantation Hill, but he is a small business owner of a very successful and local HVAC company. And then, of course, you have our mayor, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And so where are their values? Their values very much are, let's address our vulnerabilities and let's make sure that we have plans in place. One thing that we know is a turbulence that's going to happen, and we need to be prepared for that, is the bridge. Right? And so that's a topic of conversation. This Saturday, we're going to be talking about what defines a resilient community and what are those measures that we want to make for ourselves. And so you can expect this council is going to be talking with their consultant engineer, going around looking at all of our facilities and assessing them with benchmarks 1 through 5. That if we have a Category 1 storm, how is that going to affect all of our facilities? If we have a Category 2, how is that going to affect our facilities? And then what is a acceptable level of vulnerability for the city of Gulf Breeze? At what rate do you want to harden yourself? Now, we all know at a certain rate, you just can't prepare for that, right? But we're talking about going past how you handle a disaster after it happens. What we're talking about now is assessing your vulnerabilities before it ever happens to make sure that you define in a very measurable way that you are a resilient community and how quickly you can bounce back when that turbulence happens. Another turbulence that could happen is another economic recession. We are in the longest economic recovery, according to Dr. Harper, certainly in recent written history. And so you have to prepare for that. With the Gulf Breeze, we are not self-sustaining, we're a bedroom community. That means we all drive somewhere else to get all of our needs met. Amazon's good, but they're not that good yet. And so we need to make sure that we continue to focus on those targeted industries that we have. We all probably just recently read the headline that App River was sold. That could be very turbulent to our local area. And so Michael Murdoch, talking personally with the city, giving us assurances because he knows how important App River is to this area, that's very, very important. Continuing to grow our technology and industry, our medical and our upper education. When you're a 98% built out community, that is essential because we look for those high wage jobs in order for those people to be able to afford to live in our community in order to keep the millage low for the rest of us. Does that make sense? And so all of that will be focus of this Saturday's work session. Of course, they're going to talk stormwater. And we're also going to be talking about our new neighborhood enhancement program. Some of you may have recently read about that in the paper as well. But in the last year, we have created a neighborhood services division within our community services department. And the role of the neighborhood services division is to meet with our neighborhoods and assess with them, well, what are your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats, so that we can assess what might be a perceived issue and then what's truly a vulnerability. Because if we have a growth management issue that we haven't addressed, if there is a lot of cut-through traffic, as we recently heard in Soundview Trail, that could be something that with the additional traffic from the bridge, that is a true threat to the fabric of that neighborhood. And so let's measure that and let's get ahead of that. That's the mission of the Neighborhood Services Division, is to first try to get as much input as we possibly can, one neighborhood at a time, and go through with them, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what are those opportunities that you see for yourself, and then what are those threats? And especially as it relates to those opportunities, then how can we as a city help? And the council is going to talk about more about that. They're going to talk about grant opportunities. They're going to talk more about tapping into their savings. And as it relates to our savings, the mayor and council 2 years ago adopted a policy that we will have 3 times the recommended amount from the Florida League of Cities in reserves, sacrosanct, to be there when a natural disaster happens. And so whenever you hear us talk about savings, we're not talking about that. That money sits here, and it's 6 months of operating reserves. So if we have a lights out situation, then that means that for 6 months, you know that your community is going to be able to continue to operate. Making sure that our utility billing and all of our customer information is kept in the cloud is very important. You saw with our Storm, I think it was it Nathan? We launched a new program where, from your phone, you can let us know any kind of flooding issue or other concern that you have so that we can provide immediate response. We're linking that with our geographic information system so that we can continue to track it. These are all efforts that we're making so that we can be more proactive, not just on the disaster recovery side, which we feel we have been strengthening systematically in the last 10 years, but on the front end so that we can assess our vulnerabilities and be more resilient after that turbulence happens. So with that, I'm going to pause and I'm going to just open the floor and I'm going to answer whatever questions that y'all have for me. And if I can't answer them, then I'm going to ask Ms. Teresa to. All right. Any questions at all?
So when I think about sustainability and resilience, I also think about renewable energies. Where's the city on that issue?
So 2 years ago, the council looked at their most livable city plan, and the goal of the most livable city plan is to be the most livable, city in the state of Florida by 2020. And so that means that later this year, they're going to be looking at, casting out and, looking at that next long-term plan. But they pulled from that because they wanted to be really aggressive when you're in a race and that last, quarter of a mile. So we're gonna pull out money from reserves and really try to do those quality of life projects. Renewable energy is one of those that made the short list. There was a total of $22 million worth of projects, and those were put out for a public poll. They were put in the media and put out on social survey, and that was not one of the top priorities when they were done with that process. And so it's still something, solar energy, that we continue to look at. That right now there's incentives that are offered by the state that we think offer just as easily. So we continue to be interested in that. For us right now, the renewable energy that we're really focused on is our effluent disposal. And if you don't mind, I'll talk just a minute, about effluent disposal. But that's referring to your treated wastewater. And that's important to us because we live on a peninsula that's surrounded by salt water on 3 sides. And so by putting that treated wastewater that is almost at a drinking water level, it's very high quality by DEP standards, back into the ground, it recharges the groundwater, and it recharges those wells that if ever we were not to use Fair Point and we had to just pull up the drawbridge for whatever reason, let's say there's major storm, we're able to have that water. And that's important to protect that on the entire peninsula. The city of Gulf Breeze made the decision to purchase the Tiger Point golf course, and with that we're able to dispose of a lot of our effluent disposal. Holly Navarre has a significant challenge. They don't have the same ability to get rid of their effluent disposal, and yet they also have to increase their wastewater capacity because of their increase in population. Then you also have the issue with Navarre, which is that they have their wastewater on the island, and that is an environmental problem. They're discharging into the Sound, and so they need to get the wastewater, pipe it off the island and do something with it. And so we here in Gulf Breeze are saying, we can take your wastewater, give it to us. In fact, if you don't even want to treat it, if we can get it just as far as Tiger Point, we can treat it. But it's very important to keep that valuable resource on the peninsula. We I believe it was $1 that we charge for commercial industries to use that for their ground irrigation. It is a win-win for us. But politics being what they are, Holly Navarre is wanting to ask Tallahassee to create a regional water utility, or they would like to pipe the water up to leased land on Eglin and use Triumph money or some other kind of unknown source that would cost millions of dollars. And that's simply because of silos, and they don't want to partner together. Our response to that is that you have Fair Point Utility, which has worked very well for us for drinking water. We all come to the table and we trust each other, so why wouldn't we do the same thing with the water that we treat? So that's going to be a conversation that we continue to have for the next year. It doesn't benefit us financially to have it. It's just something that's about a renewable resource.
There's still a lot of folks on septic. Is there an effort to switch those over?
In the state, that's a very popular discussion right now. So with the BP settlement money that's coming through the Restore program, that is a top priority for them. That's exciting to us. We have a project teed up outside of our incorporated city limits, but on Sound side that the county supports and that we support, and that would get 164 residents off of septic. So that would be very significant. Inside the city, because we don't have as many and they're scattered out, we don't have that same grant program. But the council approved what we call a STEP program, septic tank elimination program, and that does allow for a cash match. Each case would each application would go to the council individually, and they would look at the likelihood of other people on that street also connecting on. So yes, that continues to be a conversation, a good question. Ms. Teresa?
Tell them what you drive, Samantha.
What I drive? So I drive a Ford Fusion that operates on compressed natural gas. We've had a compressed natural gas system. We've had natural gas in the city since the early 90s. The council also just approved expanding our 2 compressed natural gas refueling stations. One is right behind City Hall and the other is at our equipment operations station. That is, there were subsidies through the state that allowed us to, to save money. That's not the case anymore. The cost to retrofit those vehicles is cost prohibitive over the life of the vehicle. We break even, but we do it because we should. And so that's why we continue to do that. Yes, sir?
Is there any plans for the city to grow in size, like to move out towards Venice or even farther down the highway?
There aren't at this time. I think especially when a city has a lot of opportunities, it's very important for me to understand what the council want to achieve. And you have to me, if you scatter your efforts, then your efforts are diluted, the results are poor. And so their focus is on our vulnerability. I think that the last council was much more growth focused. I don't expect that to be, I don't expect that to come from this council. They may surprise me. And if you haven't picked up by now, I serve at the will and pleasure of my council. So I do what they tell me to do. That is my job. And my understanding is that in the past, timing being, critical in life, you have had those in Greater Gulf Breeze who've wanted to incorporate, and the city hasn't wanted it. And then you've had those in the city who were ready, and they, those in Greater Gulf Breeze did not want it. And so I think, maybe one day that will all happen, but I don't see that on the near-term horizon. I don't. Robert?
Thank you for coming tonight and giving this talk. And the whole time you were talking, my attention was being split between the great presentation you were giving and the artifacts from Dead Man's Island over there behind it. And I see that as one of our vulnerabilities, that Dead Man's Island in this era that we've been measuring the increases in sea level, that if there are any resources out there, every year that we have a hurricane season is an opportunity for us to lose those. And I know we put a lot of money into maintaining the geomorphology of Dead Man's Island, and with the University of West Florida's archaeology program, I would hope that we would find a way to conserve what's there before we lose it in a storm. And it does have a great historical value to us. And it would be great, there are 2 empty cases up there, and wouldn't it be great if we could preserve that and take it out of harm's way? I
think that's a great point, and I hope everyone has been to Dead Man's Island. When I get to visit, I feel like I'm in Goonies. It is the coolest. I mean, you just don't want to come back. You really do feel like you're a Goonie, and it's just so cool. You got to brag. That's just a beautiful natural resource, and it's a national resource. The city a year and a half ago approved about $130,000 in order to restore the isthmus there. That's very important, having that breakwater to make sure that isthmus doesn't wash away again is also important. So I think, Robert, you're right on. And I think that is a very important natural resource that the council grasp that. I mean, they have always renewed their commitment. So, and we appreciate everything that you do. For those of you who don't know, Robert and I, we're tight because I see him often. He's a wonderful citizen liaison to myself and to our council. So, sir?
Just one quick question, and I'll talk with you later
Yes.
about this, but it's a national maritime heritage area that is being promoted by University of West Florida and I guess it's the archaeological network in this area. And I would like to talk to you about the city supporting that. And all that has to be done is a simple letter written that said, yes, we support it, but it falls in line with what's trying to be done here. And it comes under the auspices of the National Park Service, which means that there's money available. Once it's done and voted on by Congress, then it would be money available to us in order to use within our community.
Well, that is great. And I would recommend that, that you talk with our Parks Advisory Board about that, and so that you would, and with a proclamation or a resolution, both from our Parks Advisory Board and also from our City Council, because both of them, I know, would absolutely love to support it. And the great news is Robert is on the Parks Advisory Board. So we'll be.
She's throwing you under the bus now.
So.
I think she just gave me the steering wheel.
Well, that leads me to a question. Is there access to there? That the public can gain access to the island?
Isn't it just by water?
It is, but also, I think both Robert has taken visitors out, and also Heather Reed, our environmental consultant, on a lot of things related to Dead Man's Island. So if you're interested, we can set you up with a tour. Just call the city, and she takes field trippers out there all the time, so we can make that arrangement. Maybe that would be a really great excursion that we could schedule with this group.
It would.
Oh man, let me tell you, you stand on the sand and you can feel the ships underneath your feet. It is the coolest. So,
Oh, okay.
that. So thank you very much. I enjoyed speaking with you.